Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is Kat with AAPL. With that, let's hand it over to Chris Ragland, our GRC chair, to lead today's legislative town hall.
Awesome. Thank you, Kat. Appreciate the introduction. And again, welcome everyone to the American Association of Private Lenders Legislative Town Hall. This is a quarterly town hall that we host. As Kat mentioned, I'm the chair, so I took it as an honor to be able to take over and do this. Kat's been doing it for us for far too long, and it's our turn to be taking over and handling these issues. So without further ado, I'm going to get started. Let's do some housekeeping really quickly. We are going to be pausing throughout this webinar and answering questions. So if you're new to Zoom, and I don't know how you could be over the last 2 months of everything that's changed, I think everyone is a Zoom expert now. I know we were having a great time managing our backgrounds together, but if you're new to Zoom, there's actually a chat feature. So if you go up to the top of your screen, you can see the 2 little chat bubbles and you can actually ask questions there. So you don't have to wait till the very end to get your questions in. In fact, we're encouraging you to submit those questions throughout the webinar series. Kat will be helping me moderate that and letting me know when we do have some questions. And I do have the rest of the Government Relations Committee here on the webinar that will be able to answer those. So please use the Ask a Question feature. And if there's a topic that you're really hot about and you want to talk about, you can also raise your hand and let us know. And then I'll let Kat make the judgment if she wants to let somebody else actually speak on this, but she'll be handling that, no pressure. And we'll be getting into some of the meat. One other housekeeping item that's not here on the bullet points, the default for Zoom is to put the talking heads in the right-hand side of your screen. We've got some charts and graphs that we want you to be able to see all of the information. So I would encourage you to hover over and either minimize or move the video out of the way so that you don't miss some of the important information that we're sharing with you today. So what's on the agenda? We're going to be covering a few things. First of all, we're going to be covering current, essentially government activity across the nation. I'm sick and tired of hearing the word unprecedented, but that's what we're in. We're in that type of a time right now. And as such, you're seeing a response from our local, state, and federal government changing things to effectively enable business. At least that's the idea, is how can we enable business? How can we address some of the issues that are occurring? But there's also a lot of negative impacts, especially to business owners. And we're going to dive into some of those things. So some of the issues are meant to be business enablement, stimulus. Other issues are meant to effectively be protecting the end consumer. And some of those things can have adverse effects or unintended consequences more often. So we're going to talk about the government impact essentially on private lending specifically, because that's what we're here to talk about. We're also going to talk about real estate investment associations, right? The relationships that we as an association have with the various RIAs across the country. We've asked for help in this before, but we're going to double down and reiterate the fact that we need help forming these relationships and continuing to work with the RIAs across the country. We'll talk about how RIAs across the country have helped the association in general, and in turn, all of us as private lenders. And then, of course, at the end, if you do want to wait till the very end to have a comment or a question, we will certainly pause for a Q&A period. Some things to be thinking about while we're having this discussion. So if you're taking notes, or if maybe you're trying to decide what type of feedback are we looking for, specifically, we're interested on how did government activity or inactivity impact your business? Was there a temporary legislation, an executive order, a city council? We're very interested to learn from you, the members, what type of government activity or inactivity is impacting you. And then we should start talking about legislation again. So there's some legislation that might be occurring right now, some new bills that might be working their way through the process. But what's going on that AAPL should know about? We obviously have a lot of tools at our fingertips that we use to stay in touch with types of bills that are happening, but you, the member in your local community, you will know before anyone else if you're paying attention, and we're asking you to alert us for those types of things. And then finally, essentially, what else is it that you want us to be doing? Again, these are different times. Most of us are working remote at home, or some of us have finally started to go back into an office environment and starting to reintegrate in society, and things are just different. So we're opening the forum up again to you, our member, and saying, what do you want us to be focused on and working on? All right, who are these guys up here talking? So this is essentially our Government Relations Committee. This is a relatively new committee inside of AAPL. Of course, we have the support of AAPL. I'm talking about A and Linda, and of course, Kat, who introduced us on the call today. So those effectively that's the senior leadership for AAPL. We interface on a day-to-day basis with Kat. She's on so many emails in terms of what's going on. So I want to say thank you to Kat and all the support that you've lended us as the Government Relations Committee. I'm Chris Ragland. I'm the first chair for the Government Relations Committee. Been really excited to be here. It's been an interesting, say, year and a half as we've been dealing with this. And then, of course, we've got Matt and Nima, who are also other members of the, essentially the leadership committee, if you will. And both of those guys have been very large mouthpieces for the Government Relations Committee. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. And now we've got the rest of the committee. So we've got Court, Edwin, Mike, and John. What I like most about this entire Government Relations Committee is the differences in backgrounds that each of us have as business leaders. We have private lenders, we have attorneys, we have appraisal management companies, and then of course we've got a difference in private lending philosophy. We have local regionals and we have nationals. So there's a lot of different diversity that's represented on this committee. That was very deliberate when this committee was first formed, and we were looking for representation from around the country and a different variety of responsibilities. All right, so let's talk about a few things that are going on. This is essentially what's been new. This is the current event slide, if you will. We've been talking about this as a Government Relations Committee. I know from my standpoint, one of the things that we've been looking at is the restrictions on foreclosures, specifically from a consumer protection standpoint, and how is this impacting private lenders. Not all private lenders are the same. A lot of private lenders have different focuses and different types of products. So that's one of the things that we've seen some private lenders been impacted on. You may have borrowers who are not able to make the payment because of various cash flow issues. And then you may be restricted on essentially foreclosing and securitizing your asset and getting back your equity. However, you may not be impacted. Most of us are doing commercial business purpose loans, and most of the legislation that we've seen doesn't apply to that. So that's what we're looking for here is we're trying to see what type of foreclosure activity and how is that impacting our membership base. Perhaps a little bit closer to an impact standpoint is eviction moratoriums. Many of the private lenders do build portfolios of rental properties, and what we have seen across the nation are moratoriums on evictions. Now, this one's been kind of interesting on two sides. First, we saw effectively a complete cease in terms of these evictions. So this just stopped overnight. And these consumers, effectively these people who are the tenants that are in these homes, are protected. However, and I'm speaking a little bit from personal experience, what we are watching effectively is a backlog of evictions that have been building up. And many states are preparing or have already moved forward to allow the eviction process to begin. So you're starting to see some articles that are out in terms of they're calling it the tsunami of evictions. So what we're interested in and what we have been having discussions on is this necessarily real? Are you seeing it in your local marketplace? Was this something that a local government stepped in and caused this problem, or did it need to happen to begin with? These are the types of things that we're thinking about in terms of how we relate to government activity. It's also a push, finally, I would say, about time. We're talking about remote notaries. You're starting to see the abilities of people who have been integral in a process that frankly has been antiquated for a long time. We're talking about wet ink signatures on papers at closing, which is the next item that we have here. But there's been a strong push for allowing businesses to continue to operate and effectively enabling notaries to notarize a document without being present. So that is a little bit of a first. We haven't seen that before. So whereas the first ones were aimed effectively, in my opinion, at protecting consumers and the tenants, you're starting to see some things in this list that are actually helpful for business owners, such as ourselves. And then the last part was the electronic recording. I know personally, I can tell you several states actually have a digital signature act that is in law and has been passed. Except from a practice standpoint, you're still seeing title companies and lenders not accepting a digital signature at a closing. We'll leave it to a pandemic to allow people to start doing digital closings and signings. So I know I'm based here in Texas, and I've worked with local lenders as well as regional and national lenders, and we're starting to see this pick up. This has also been an area that I think, from a legislation standpoint, was really intended to try and help and speed up the process of business instead of restrict it. So we have a little bit of a balance here in terms of examples of government activity that is a direct result of the pandemic, and we're very curious to see how that's impacted you. I'll pause there for just a second before I move on to the next slide. Kat, do we have any comments? You can give me a visual too, because I can see you on my screen. So, all right. So we don't have any new ideas or complaints, and it sounds like I'm doing an okay job. So we'll just keep moving on. So again, I've been asking this question, and we're very curious. So if you've been checking your email and you haven't been hiding under a rock, I'm sure you've seen that we've sent out a couple of surveys, and we're very interested to know from you what is hindering or helping your business during COVID. Why this is interesting, other than just good data collection and so that we know what's going on out there, it also gives us an idea of what we need to be prepared for and what we need to be looking for when it comes to interacting with our various representatives. There's a lot of things that happened during the pandemic that we're thinking may not go away. There's a lot of things that hopefully won't go away that are allowing us to be more efficient. But if we don't know what's going on out there, it's hard for us to stay on top of it. I am going to turn it over because Court actually ran point on this entire process. In fact, I'm going to give him credit. It was his idea. He said, why don't we go out and do a survey? Why don't we find out what's happening at the ground level? And he's going to go over these results with you. So Court, take it away, please, sir.
All right. Thanks a lot, Chris. And if it's a good idea to do this survey, then I'll take all the credit. And if it's a bad idea and you don't like the results, then of course it's Chris's fault. Okay. So let's just get that out of the way right out of the gate.
Well done, Court.
So this is the first batch of results on the survey. We've only had a couple of weeks to kind of solicit responses. This is part of the process of getting ready for the annual meeting in November. And so I suspect the survey will be available to all of our members for a period of time. All of the survey results are date stamped. So as sentiment changes over time, we're able to track that, and that can be really helpful as well. So if you haven't done the survey already, we really encourage you to do so. And in the meantime, let's get you some interim results. First, we've only received 30 survey responses so far. So while interesting, the results are not yet statistically significant. Of the responses, 15 of them were roughly 50% were from private lenders. And you can see from the graphic there that we have a wide range of service and direct lender and fund manager relationships all responding. So we can do crosstabs when we get more data and figure out who's been impacted the most by industry type, in addition to just getting generally good information. Go ahead and do the next slide, please, Chris. Okay, so we asked respondents about the extent to which the coronavirus has reduced revenues, caused layoffs, curtailed investment, or curtailed distributions, and whether or not it was actually causing the prospect of going out of business entirely. This graph shows responses on each of those 5 questions, and generally here's the findings. So 16 out of 30 respondents, or 53%, answered the question about reduced revenues. Of those, the average reduction was 54%. So the group of bar charts on the far left, we had 4 respondents who really had very little impact, below 20%. We had the same number that had a lot of impact, and there's a pretty good grouping in the middle, everywhere in between. With respect to curtailed investment, you can see by the far right blue bar, there's pretty big response here. Yes, 14 respondents indicated their firms had curtailed investment. Not surprising, since so much of our sample was direct lenders. And those direct lenders, we've heard data that basically 80% of direct lenders across the country pulled back in the last two months. I know that's been our case with our company. I know it's been the case probably with people you know as well. So their average curtailment was 75% pullback, according to our survey respondents so far. Regarding those that may have instituted layoffs, 6 of the 30 respondent firms have, in fact, instituted layoffs. While a small sample size, it's important to note that the actual number of people laid off was as high as 50%. So that's kind of an interesting number to me. I think our industry is dominated by small players by and large. And so that's reflected in such a large percentage of layoffs per respondent. Of the 30 respondents, only 1 reported a concern about actually going out of business. And they indicated there was an 80% probability of that. Pretty drastic. Good news, it was only 1. Bad news, pretty drastic response. About 16% of all respondents had indicated they had curtailed distributions to investors. And the reported level of curtailment in terms of distributions, there were 2 groupings. There was one grouping around the 40 to 60% curtailment range. There was a second grouping that really they curtailed all distributions, at least on an interim basis. And again, I think that number, that outcome is pretty heavily skewed by the nature of our respondents. Again, 15 of 30 are direct lenders. Many of them have funds. Many of them said, well, we don't know what's going on. We're just going to conserve cash and wait and see. So I don't know what the experience has been in your world, but this is what our respondents are telling us so far. It was interesting to note that of those that curtail distributions, it's widely dependent on the nature of their business. Those in the service industry, like attorneys, brokers, insurance businesses, they had 0 curtailment. Whereas we had 3 respondents that were in the real estate investment world, all 3 curtailed by 100%. And likewise, 9 of the 15 respondents who were private lenders had curtailed by an average of 63%. Let's go ahead and do the next slide, please, Chris, if we can. Yeah, right there. Nope, back one, please. They're right there. Okay, so we also asked respondents to express their level of concern about 7 hot button government affairs type general topics, okay? So we asked about HMDA reporting requirements. How onerous is that for you? We asked about concerns about regulatory compliance. Complicated regulations could mean that we're out of compliance. We don't even know it. We wanted to explore that topic. We inquired about the concerns related to added costs from new regulations, and likewise concerns about new potential rent control laws and new potential eviction laws. And then finally, we had 2 additional questions. One was probing the extent to which we feel potentially that legislators' lack of knowledge about what they're actually proposing in some areas regarding affordability, housing affordability issues, whether their lack of knowledge actually could create unintended consequences. Finally, we asked about the degree to which we are concerned about a lack of objectivity and healthy discourse, honest discussion and debate on any political issue that may arise simply because of partisan politics. Are our political leaders able to actually objectively consider a proposal and look at opposing points of view, or are partisan politics getting in the way? And this graph in front of you shows you the results. Partisan politics actually was the highest scoring, most sensitive topic. The lowest scoring topic was HMDA reporting. So as a committee, that kind of tells us where we should be focusing our energy, and that's a great reason why we ask everybody to complete the survey. Chris, could you do the next slide, please? This slide shows the same data as the prior slide, but with greater level of detail and greater level of sensitivity. To sort of interpret it, and we're almost done this section, but to interpret it, of the 7 issues, partisan politics was clearly the biggest area of concern. If you look at the grouping in the far right, you'll notice there's a big, tall blue bar, very concerned. And there's no bar for mildly concerned and no bar for not concerned at all. There are some indifferent respondents, but by and large, people are pretty adamant that our politicians need to get more objective and honest when they're considering policy decisions. We found the same sort of grouping on the unintended consequences graph, that's second from the right, that grouping. And you can see that a new regulation, new rent control laws, and new eviction laws also have pretty big response levels. What do we take away from this? Probably that perhaps the two biggest takeaways are that honest and constructive communication between policymakers and industry is very important, and that it's going to take a sustained effort in order to bridge the gap. Got to work on improved communication and really building trust. Next, while the concern about burdensome new regulation ranked only number 4 out of the list of 7, I would like to point out that the end of our survey had 2 open probes. Just anything comes to your mind, tell us what is on your mind about what we as a committee should be doing for you immediately, and where we should be focusing our time in the intermediate time horizon. So what can we do? What should we do now? And what should we be doing over the next 1 to 3 years? And overwhelmingly, the feedback we got from those open probes was regulation, concern about keeping regulation out of our businesses. So that's my big takeaway, and hopefully you find this information helpful for you. As a committee, it really helps us focus our attention on things and how we provide value to our members. And it's a good case of, again, why we're asking you to take the survey. You help us, we help you. All right, thanks a lot, Chris.
Hey, that was awesome. So again, thank you, Court, for putting that together. And that's essentially what we're here to do, is to gather data to represent all of our interests with the various local governments and national at the federal level. But we want to know how it impacted you. So 30 is a small number. We really want to get those numbers up. This was a perfect opportunity for a Wolf of Wall Street meme, Kat, for you to put in the presentation for getting your numbers up. But that's what we're trying to do here. We really need to get more respondents. So please take the survey if you have not already done so. On that note, let's talk about other ways that you can help the GRC. We've talked about this before. When we need allies on the ground, it's great that we have all of our AAPL members. But one of the ways that we can essentially magnify our presence is by teaming up with local real estate organizations. We're looking for investment organizations at the local level. When we were doing work in Florida, when we were doing work in New York, it was the RIA relationships that could have allowed us to really stand a lot taller. And I think that we were surprised when we were really honest with ourselves in terms of our networking capabilities in New York City. We didn't have as many relationships with local RIAs that we needed. So this is us recognizing that as the Government Relations Committee and coming back out to you and saying, we need to form new RIA relationships. So we're asking you for help in this, but know that we're also doing this ourselves. So what are the advantages? It's what I talked about. These are natural allies. What's good for a real estate investor tends to be good for a private lender. And then there's no better representation than local. So local mobilization is the most powerful tool that we can have. NEMA can only get on a plane so many times and go somewhere for us. So what are our priorities? We talked about New York. I just mentioned it. It's still a thing, right? So this isn't going to go away. We still need assistance in these areas. So if you're listening right now and you're in New York, or you know of local RIAs in New York that you can help us partner up with, please put them in contact. You can have them reach out to any of us if you want on the committee, but right down here at the bottom, contact@aaplonline.com. That is the best way for you to send us someone that we can reach out to and connect. And of course, we're interested in New York because there's some legislative activity there that is right center of table, and we're talking about it. But any active RIA groups that you have a connection with anywhere across the country, we're interested in working with those groups. All right, this brings us to that fun slide at the very end. So I'm looking over at Kat right now to see if we have any other comments or questions. Historically, we'll be honest, the Government Relations Committee does not usually get a lot of comments and questions, and that's okay. We're here to serve you. We want to provide this content and serve it up. If you do have a question or a comment, though, there's other ways that you can get in contact with us. We actually have our own page on AAPL's website, so the link's right here. You can check it out. That's aaplonline.com/gov. So if we're not delivering what's informative for you, if we're not working with your legislation or your legislators and you want us to, or if there's just something you want us to know about, let us know. This is also my chance to plug the next town hall, which will be later this year. So again, this is an online registration forum. I think we've gotten this down pretty well now, but it'll be Wednesday, September the 16th at 1:30, and that's Central Time, that you'll have that. So you can register on the link below, and naturally you'll see more emails from us that'll come out from the AAPL. So if we don't have any other questions or comments, I just wanted to say thank you for your time. We really appreciate your support.
All right, doesn't look like, but we have one question that came in. Can we please give an update about 2501828?
Yeah, and I think that I'm assuming it's a reference to California's AB 2501 and AB 828, which are bills moving through the California legislature. And I'm happy to opine on that, being your local California rep. So as it relates to AB 828, AB 828 is legislation which has it has two components to it. The first component is that it has a landlord-tenant restriction aspect of it. Initially, it could have provided a judge to reduce rents up to 25% if a judge had determined that the tenant qualified, effectively that they had a need, and in addition that it wouldn't bear an unreasonable burden on the landlord. They removed the 25% component in the latest revision. In addition, as it pertains to lenders, it provided a all-out foreclosure moratorium in the state of California. So you could not file a notice of default, you could not file a notice of sale, and you could not proceed to a trustee sale in California. And so that bill appears to have died in the committee. And the reason why it appears to have died in the committee is that AB 2501 took the same concepts as it related to lenders and providing an all-out prohibition on any sort of foreclosure activity. And the time period that's relevant is from whenever this bill gets passed and for a period of 6 months from whenever the governor declares that California is no longer in a state of emergency due to COVID-19. So we know that at a minimum, it has a 6-month impact. We don't know, but that's the floor. Who knows how long Newsom will keep the state in this, in a crisis state. In addition, AB 2501, and probably what's more worrisome, also basically has a mandatory forbearance aspect of it. So it's a very poorly written piece of legislation as it is currently constructed, meaning that you actually can't necessarily opine on who it affects. The way that I would read it is that it affects loans made to individual borrowers secured by 1 to 4 family properties. And so it does not care whether you're a business purpose lender or a consumer lender. It's looking to who is your borrower and what is your collateral will determine whether you are required to provide mandatory forbearances to your borrower. And that's what it's aiming to do. So it would require kind of similar time periods, a minimum 6-month forbearance up to a full year forbearance. And it provides significant penalties if you don't do this. So for example, if you proceeded with a foreclosure, instead of providing this forbearance, you could lose your right to proceed with a foreclosure until you then retroactively applied forbearance and placed the borrower where they could have been. So obviously massive regulation, unfortunately very hard to read regulation because it's also unclear, at least as it's written, to who it necessarily applies to. The status of this bill is that there's a hearing on it today, actually. So we're going to find out more on where this bill goes. It's floating through committee still. Unfortunately, if you look at the historical record from a vote perspective, is this one is moving quickly. So it appears as though AB 828 is probably not moving, and AB 20501 is very much going to move forward. The good news is that from an organizational perspective is that you have a lot of this bill went by quietly, at least from a mortgage lender perspective. Most people were not hammering this one initially, but now you have most lobbying organizations and most lending organizations really attacking this one altogether. So I know obviously AAPL is involved here, California Mortgage Association, California Mortgage Bankers Association, National Mortgage Bankers Association. You name the alphabet soup of lending organizations are all have their sights on this one. So this should be one where I would doubt that this, if it does pass, I significantly doubt it passes in its current form. Because of the amount of opposition it's now facing from significant organizations.
Hey, Nima, there's actually a follow-up on the question too. They're looking for what type of progress has been made essentially on the business purpose exception?
You know, it's an interesting question, right? I mean, this goes back into what is the state of the law. And so there's, if you read the legislation as it currently is written, it applies to individual borrowers, and where it gets tricky and why I say it's not clear who this applies to is individual borrowers who could get federal relief. What it means to qualify to be able to obtain federal relief is unclear. And so does that mean that you necessarily are an individual borrower that otherwise has a program available to you? So for example, the Freddie Mac program or the FHA programs or the various federal programs that have currently been floating out there. Do you need to be both an individual and to qualify for some other form of relief? It's not clear right now. So I don't think that the legislator, when they will revisit this, I think they will change the language. I think that there is some sense that in its current form, it's not passing. I don't get the sense that they are looking to tie this directly to our traditional definitions of personal, family, or household use. I don't think that's where the legislative body is going. If California loves to wield a weird axe when we start swinging. I think the legislation will likely be tied to 1 to 4 family collateral, but I suspect the definitions will get tighter over time. The good news is that it, at least for now, is tied to loans that are made to individuals, and obviously, thankfully, a lot of the people on this call and a lot of people in the industry really make loans to LLCs and corporations, and those are not currently protected classes under this legislation.
Great, thanks for that, Nima. Kat, I'll hand it back over to you.
So everybody, thank you for coming today. There will be a recording of this town hall on the AAPL government relations page. So as a reminder, that is at aaplonline.com/gov. And in other housekeeping, we do have our annual conference coming up. I know that some of you may be looking for an update on what's happening with that in light of COVID. We still have it scheduled for November 15 through 17 at Cedars. We are looking to potentially add a virtual element to that, depending on how things are going with COVID and what allowances Cedars Palace makes on how many attendees that we can have at a conference, since it is usually a very large one, numbering more than 500 attendees. We will be sending out emails about that as we get a little bit closer. And then if you're looking for updates, you can find those online at aaplonline.com/conference. So we do have our page up there and ready to go for the 2020 conference, which will be our 11th one. So we've been doing this for a while. And of course, if you have any questions about this or any matter, you can always reach us at contact@aaplonline.com. The team is also always reachable there, and we'll always make sure that it gets to the right person. With that, I think that's all I have. I don't see any more questions coming in, but again, if you have follow-up ones, just reach out to us. Thank you everyone again for attending, and have a great rest of your week.